Hello and welcome to Eden Live, where I am reading all of Eden by FREI live on Facebook and on YouTube. And as some of you have already found out, of course, and are following it quite regularly, these clips then also do make their way onto Instagram, IGTV. And thank you for that. Thank you for following me there, and thank you for being with me in this experiment and adventure. I've changed the setup a little bit. I've moved from one part of my living room to another part simply for two reasons. First of all, to show you the Eden miniature series behind me. I thought I might for once take advantage of the fact that I have a book and record shelf behind me and show you these. So you should be able to see most of them, if not all of them, from Dimensions all the way through to Euphoria. But the more important reason is that I wanted to visually mark the fact that there is a change of register, as I've already announced on a number of occasions, that this is really something quite different that we're into now, because we're into the Snowflake Collector. And the Snowflake Collector holds a special position in the entire series for a number of reasons. First of all, it's the first, not the only, but the first entirely self-contained story, the entirely self-contained short story. It's almost a short novella, but it's a short story, really. There are some others as well, but this is the first one that is embedded in Eden by FREI. We now, with the Snowflake Collector, leave behind the scene setting, the setup that happened in Dimensions, and then the reflections on matters of the heart that we had in Heart. And now we're entering a totally different world. And the other reason that the Snowflake Collector is special is this. You see it behind me there as well. I'll make more use of the shelf behind me. Is that this book exists in two editions already. I mean, these editions also exist as ebooks, but that aside, it exists as both part of the Eden miniature series, which is this one here, which looks similar to the other miniatures, and it has no pictures in it. And yes, it does have a picture of me on the front cover. I will explain in a moment, at least in rough outline why. But it also exists, and in a way, maybe perhaps more interesting, as a, for this particular story at any rate, as an illustrated picture storybook for grown-ups, as I like to think of it and as I call it, illustrated by Diego Cassi, a good friend of mine, and it was actually published as a book before the corresponding Eden miniature volume came out. And I will read from this. The text is identical. They are exactly the same, and the text is exactly as it originally was published as part of the Eden by FREI series. And I will also show you the illustrations as we go through. And just very briefly, if you do wonder why it is that I put a picture of myself on the cover of my own book, this has several layers to it. It's not that I'm suggesting, or I'm not hoping to suggest that I am the Snowflake Collector. I am not. But 10 years ago, precisely 10 years ago, in fact, this time 10 years ago, we were in the Alps, in the mountains, in a remote valley. In fact, in the remotest valley I've ever been to in the Swiss Alps. And we were shooting the first and so far only feature film I've ever made, The Hour of Living. And in this film, which I wrote, I also acted a character, the character of George. This is a still from the film. And George is not the Snowflake Collector either. But George is, if you like, the inspiration to the Snowflake Collector. So the character of George is the inspiration for the different character, fictional character in the Collector. So it's a little bit as if Theo, the young man who in The Hour of Living goes up into the mountains and visits George there, it's as if he came back from his stay there in the mountains and then wrote a short story, not based on the life of George, but inspired by the person he met there. I think we're into a meta level. And that's also the reason why I've got a picture of myself on the book, because those of you who have been to the website or who have been following Eden by FREI may remember or know, or maybe not, that FREI is a metonym. I think I coined the term metonym. I had searched it before and not come across it, but it's really a pseudonym to a pseudonym, and it's an acronym as well. And if you want the full explanation, it's on the website at edenbyfrei.net. So much for the scene setting, for the context. And I think this I will be done with context from now on in. We're simply going to read chapter by chapter, and I'm going to show you Diego's illustrations as well as we go through. This is the Snowflake Collector, and this is chapter 1, barely the end of October. At the end of the valley, the far end, before it yields to the glacier, which reaches down from the mountain pass, slowly receding now with growing temperature, lives an old man who looks at the world still with wonder. He is not as old as he seems at first glance, and much older than his years all the same, for he knows deep inside what holds the universe together and what tears it apart, and what being these molecules, what being that energy means. He knows it, but he can't express it, and so he won't. He won't talk about it. He won't, in fact, talk about anything much. He appreciates silence. When he was young, he used to meet up with friends for a drink and a chin wag, and then it began to dawn on him that much of what he was being told, and even more of what he heard himself speak, was an array of variations on themes, things he'd heard said and had spoken before, in this way, or that, or another. Self-perpetuating reiterations of what everybody already knew and keenly agreed on, or hotly disputed, as was their whim. And so he let go. He let go of his friends, whom he loved, but could no longer bring himself to like, and let go of the circuitous conversations that did nothing but remind everybody that they were still who they thought they needed to want to be. He was tired, and being tired, he got old, older than his years, older than his looks, older than the oak tree in the oldest garden. And he moved once or twice first, then twice or thrice more, and each move took him further away from those whom he had made himself feel acquainted with. First to the country, then the coast, then the foreign lands, then the mountains, then the valley, and then the end of the valley, in the mountains again, the remotest place he could find. It was not that he was happy there. It was just that he was content. Content not to need to desire happiness anymore. And here he sat and walked. Sat by the house he'd bought for very little, and walked over the meadows and up to the vantage point from which he could see the peaks and the woods and the villages in the very great distance. He liked that distance. Distance was space. Distance was calm. Distance was perspective, unencumberedness. Distance was good. Winter came to the valley, and it was barely the end of October, and going for walks now was harder, because everything was covered in snow. And this being the far end, the remotest valley he could find, nobody came near the snow, or pave the paths, or even the lane that led up to his hut. So he was stuck, in a way, and he liked being stuck. It meant, in a way, being safe. Safe from visitors, safe from the desire to go out, safe from choices, the persistent demand of decisions, of joy. Simplicity. He'd craved that, and now he had it. What he was able to do still was sit on the bench in front of his hut and watch the world go by. Except the world didn't go by. It stood pretty much still. Or so it would seem. And he knew, of course, that this wasn't true, that nothing stood still, that everything was in motion always. He found it comforting. Disconcerting too, but comforting. And he had said so. He had said so and had been quoted as saying so too. With each day that passed, winter became more present and more unreal. The snowflakes tumbling from the skies like clumsy, half-frozen bumblebees out of a freezer up in the cloud. There was something in him still that reminded him of the kindness of people, and he let one or two of these snowflakes alight on his hand, and they melted and ceased to exist. How sad, he thought to himself, how just, and yes, how poetic. And he recalled once upon a time being a poet, and that's when he decided to capture and keep them. Not all of them, obviously, only some. And to collect them, to preserve them. He knew this was futile and went against nature, but therein exactly lay the exquisite sensation of thrill and deep satisfaction. To do something that was futile and that went against nature, but that would be undescribably beautiful. That was more than existing. That went beyond breathing and eating and sleeping and defecating and shaking in anger and dreaming and imagining and sitting and thinking. That was living. That was imbuing the accidental presence of clusters of mass manifest energy in this constellation with something that surpassed everything, something divine. Something purposeful and profound, something quintessentially and incomparably human. Being. Meaning. I actually read the last word of this chapter wrong. I was so thrilled with myself to have got through it without mistake. Meaning. And here are the first two illustrations from the book, Diego Cassia. And we will continue with this next time. See you then. Until then, take good care. Love and let love, and see you very soon. Bye bye.